may have heard a lot about these young people who don't have jobs. They just spend all day getting drunk and high, mucking around with cars, going to the beach and carrying on as if life was one big holiday. But this video isn't about the rich kids of the internet. This video is about being unemployed, which, take it from me, is not like a holiday.
We get you a job that says you lick toilet bowls. And that's what you do. You lick toilet bowls.
Scientific tests that compared people with jobs to people without them found that the unemployed experienced significantly higher levels of depression, anxiety, stress-related physical pain, neurological problems, and even gastrointestinal disorders. But again and again, we're told by Liberal governments that unemployment is just a deliberate choice of the unemployed.
The term gold-bludger applies to those people who don't meet their mutual obligation.
We are a nation of lifters, not leaners.
There is a new divide, the taxed and the tax-nots.
But coronavirus has made it pretty clear unemployment results from economic forces far beyond the individual. To quote a mate,
"There's not been an outbreak of laziness."
And it's more than a bit of a dead giveaway that unemployment is always higher amongst communities that we already know are subject to workplace discrimination. For example, a report in 2019 identified that levels of unemployment amongst Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were as high even now as they were in the general population during the Great Depression. But what makes the rhetoric from the Liberal Party so enraging is that for 40 years before coronavirus, maintaining a certain percentage of unemployment has been a deliberate choice made by the government.
No. I don't believe it.
To fully explain this, we have to do some time travelling back to the 1940s. Having survived the Great Depression and then World War II, the 1945 Labor government of John Curtin committed Australia to full employment policy. This obliged the government to directly create jobs for everyone, whether building large infrastructure projects or expanding government services. Full employment policy was so popular with Australians that even when the Labor government was eventually replaced with a Liberal one, the Liberals kept it in place. For 30 years, unemployment stayed consistently beneath 3%. And while it's true that back then women weren't represented in the labour force in the numbers they are now, don't forget, at that time, Australia absorbed 2 million post-war migrants with no impact on the employment rate. But flash forward to the 1970s, and after years of sustained prosperity, something in the economy was now going very wrong. Suddenly, economies like Australia's both had stagnant growth and inflation, so they called it stagflation. Unemployment was going up, but so were the prices of things. But the usual remedies weren't working. Enter this guy. Milton Friedman was an American economist who promoted getting government out of the economy. Friedman believed that everything from services to infrastructure to jobs should be left to market forces alone. His ideology may seem a bit familiar. A New Zealand economist named William Phillips had already developed a theory that high levels of employment correlated to high levels of inflation. Friedman proposed that beyond this model, there was a natural rate of desirable unemployment that would keep joblessness and inflation in a stable equilibrium. The idea is to have just enough visible unemployment in the economy to keep working people so terrified of losing their jobs they will not risk them by asking for pay rises or demanding better conditions. Friedman's theories were championed by conservative politicians and corporate interests all over the world. Australia joined in. The government made it easier for businesses to go offshore and lay off local workers, and they sacked public servants, and they walked away from the big nation-building infrastructure policies that were at the heart of the full employment strategy.
What did you do to me? What have you done to me?
The result of Friedman's new economic framework everywhere has been crumbling infrastructure and services. It's been wages declining in real terms, and it's been higher unemployment. But, you know, inflation stabilised. Of course, the economic problems of the 1970s just might have been caused by the massive international oil boycott staged by the oil-producing nations of the world against international involvement in the Yom Kippur War of 1973. That boycott caused the price of oil to increase by up to 400% at a time when economies throughout the world were dependent on oil for, shipping, industrial production and road transport. As for whether there is any natural relationship between inflation and unemployment, the American politician Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez recently quizzed the head of her country's Reserve Bank to ask if the assumptions had, over the past 40 years, managed to stack up.
Unemployment has fallen about 3 full points since 2014, but inflation is no higher today than it was 5 years ago. Given these facts, do you think it's possible that the Fed's estimates of the lowest sustainable unemployment rate may have been too high?
Absolutely.
Back in Australia, the Liberal Party is sticking with Milton Friedman. Recently, one Liberal MP even got himself sworn into Parliament holding a Friedman book rather than the alternative, which was a Bible. So remember, even though unemployment has been deliberate government policy all these years, the Liberal Party still want every unemployed Australian to believe they are a
Dull-blooded
Lean it.
Tax not.
It's up to you, Australia, whether you want to let them get away with that or not.